One of the most fundamental needs of humans is to have a safe place to live, and we've developed countless different ways to provide shelter for ourselves. And some people have built some pretty peculiar accommodations for themselves. So today we're going to take a look at 15 of the most unusual places where people live. Number 15. Matmata, Tunisia. Located in southern Tunisia, Matmata isn't a typical example of what towns are like in the country, but the things that make it unusual are what have led to it becoming one of the most recognizable places in the world, thanks to it featuring in Star Wars as the home of Anakin Skywalker. For a long time, the region was only thought to have been inhabited by nomads, and it was only in the late 1960s that Matmata became known to the outside world. With a population of a couple thousand people, the structures in the village were created by digging a large pit into the ground, with artificial caves being dug into the walls to form the rooms. Depending on the size of the family, multiple pits can be connected to create larger homes, and they can be expanded whenever needed to accommodate changing requirements. It was in 1969, though, after a period of heavy rainfall, that villagers had to request help after the homes began to collapse. Assistance was provided and the ground-level houses were built, but most of the families chose to remain living in newly built underground homes instead. Number 14. The Villages, Florida. Usually you'd expect most communities to be a mixture of people from different backgrounds and of varying ages, but there's a place in Florida that's almost like stepping into a different reality. The Villages, which is around 45 miles to the northwest of Orlando, covers an area just under 34 square miles, which is bigger than Manhattan, and it's the largest retirement community on the planet. In the past decade, it's also held the record as being the fastest expanding metro area in the United States, and it's split into 17 special-purpose community development districts. It's the result of an idea that a landowner had in the 1960s, and now each of the villages are part of the project that have their own particular rules about who can live there, and also strict requirements for the appearance and upkeep of all the homes. For example, at least 80% of the properties there must have at least one person living in it that's over the age of 55, and people under the age of 19 aren't allowed to spend more than 30 days each year there unless there's an exemption. Currently, there are around 80,000 residents in the villages, a number that's expected to dramatically rise in the coming years. But this isn't a place that suits everyone. The controlled way of life doesn't exactly give a sense of freedom, but there are benefits that come with it too. The neighborhoods are all clean and pristine. There's surprisingly little crime. Theft, for example, is around a third lower than anywhere else in Florida, and violent crimes are less than half of what would normally be expected. Number 13. Elliday Island. The desire to live in remote places away from cities has only seemed to become more common in recent years, but how secluded would you want to be if you had the chance? There's one house on an island in Iceland that's so far away from civilization that it's been the subject of a number of theories about its occupants, and still it's not clear if anyone actually lives there on a permanent basis. The island itself is called Elliday, and it's an 11-acre piece of land that's on the northeasternmost end of Westman Islands archipelago. Photos taken of the island show quite clearly that there's a white house on one of the slopes with no sign of any human activity at all. Officially, the island has a population of 0 and probably used continually throughout history as somewhere hunters would set up base while catching fish and seals. Local legend speaks of 5 families that lived in the house for over 300 years and sustained themselves on seafowl and cattle, but were forced to leave in the 1930s as the remoteness made it impossible for them to live modern lives. Rumors remained that people still live there though, with some even suggesting that there's an underground complex beneath the building. There was also the idea that it was actually owned by Icelandic singer Björk, who had been given it as a gift by the government, but all those myths are nothing more than pure fiction. In reality, the house is owned by a local hunting association and can be used by their members to live in while on the island during hunting season. You can easily get there by boat from the mainland and use a zip line to get to the cabin itself. It doesn't, however, have any electricity or running water, so they don't tend to stay there for too long. Number 12. Elephante Art House, Cornville, Arizona, United States. Set within 3 acres of land in Cornville, Arizona, the Elephante Art House was conceived and built by Michael Kahn and Leda Levant over 28 years from 1979. containing features that you'd expect from most homes, such as central heating, electricity, and running water. That's virtually where any similarities end, as the handmade home is intended to be a living art piece. There are 5 distinct areas, each of which are connected by a common theme, which are the meditation area, the art gallery, the bath, the garden sculptures, and the wetland ponds. Most of the materials used to build and decorate the house were sourced locally from the desert, and when combined with stone, glass mosaics, tiles, wood, metal, and plaster, it creates one of the coolest home interiors ever. The couple didn't have an overall plan for the building when they started, and instead followed an organic building process where they made the necessary decisions only at the last moment during construction. Since the creation of the first and main house, a number of other artists have also moved to the site and built structures of their own. And now Elephante is the name given to the entire sculptural village, which, because of the unusual community that's developed there, attracts visitors from all over the country. Number 11. Meteora Greece. Greece is a place steeped in history, and it's been home to advanced civilizations for thousands of years. To the center of the country is a series of natural rock formations known as the Meteora, and on top of them is a large complex of Eastern Orthodox monasteries which have been there since at least the 11th century. The region, though, has been an important one to human communities for far longer than that, and evidence has been found of human activity in the surrounding caves from at least 50,000 years ago. During the 16th century, there were as many as 24 monasteries at Meteora, but have since fallen into a state of disrepair, and only 6 are still in use. They were all purposefully built in remote and inaccessible places to allow the monks and nuns who lived in them to pray in peace and solitude and completely devote their lives to their religion. They have therefore been used to store treasures and historical artifacts, and during the Second World War the site was bombed too, and many of those were stolen. Across the 6 that remain, there's a permanent population of around 15 monks and 41 nuns, and the only way to get to them is by a network of staircases and paths that have been directly carved into the rock. Number 10. Melnikovs House, Moscow. The rise of Lenin's rule in Russia meant that by 1929, private ownership of homes was expressly forbidden, as was the idea of any type of architecture beyond the mundane or homogeneous. This didn't stop architects from trying to find ways around the rules, though. And while most buildings from this time lack any features, there's one that completely bucks the trends. Known as Melnikovs House and found in Moscow, it was designed by architect Konstantin Melnikov, who managed to convince the authorities that it was an experiment in economizing space and materials and could serve as a blueprint for future homes. No further ones like it were ever built, but he and his family were for a time allowed to live in it. A great example of avant-garde design, and unlike anything you'll see elsewhere, it's made up of 2 intersecting circles. This meant the interior needed fewer internal walls, so they didn't need as many materials to build it. And the honeycomb structure design has also meant that bricks were only needed around the window frames that had a hexagonal design to let plenty of light in. Around a decade later, Melnikov's right to practice architecture was revoked, mainly because of this house. But despite attempts to knock it down, he was able to remain living there, garnering special treatment because he was also the person responsible for designing Lenin's mausoleum. Number 9. High Desert House, Joshua Tree National Park, United States. The houses of the future will undoubtedly look very different than the ones we're accustomed to today. But there's no need to wait, because designers have already begun to incorporate the ideas of minimizing the impact on the surroundings and using new construction materials. One of the most unusual, futuristic, and discreet homes in the world can be found in the Joshua Tree National Park, although you might not be able to find it unless you know exactly where to look. Designed by Kendrick Bangs Kellogg, the High Desert House is on the edge of the park, and it's designed to blend in with its surroundings in an elegant way. With 5,000 square feet of living space, it's made up of 26 freestanding concrete columns that almost look like giant rib bones that have been left behind by a long extinct monster. Each of the columns is embedded at least 7 feet within the bedrock to ensure it remains stable, and are connected with sandblasted glass panels that spread the light throughout the property during the day and grant an incredible view of the night sky. Everything across the 5 floors of the structure was created from locally sourced materials, and the arches and curves continue inside and out. It took Kellogg 5 years to complete the building, which he finished in 1993. But it took a further 14 years for John Vergen, an artisanal designer, to handcraft the furniture and other decorative elements for the interior. When it was finally finished in 2014, it immediately took its place as one of the most creative, forward-thinking, and majestic homes in the world. And while it will surely never be copied, there are plenty of design techniques that will be applied to other homes of the future. Number 8. Casa No Penero. Casa No Penero, which translated from the Portuguese means House of the Rock, is a house that's in the open countryside between Faf and Cerro Rico in Dabasto, Portugal. Instead of being built from hundreds of bricks and perfectly shaped rocks, instead it's made up of 4 large boulders that between them form the foundation, walls, and ceiling of the home. It took 2 years to fully build and was completed in 1974. Despite being close to a wind farm, there's no power in Casa No Penero, and anyone that stays there has to rely on batteries and living a back-to-basics lifestyle. What the house lacks in terms of modern amenities, it more than makes up for with the stunning views and privacy that it offers. There's no other signs of life for miles around, and it's become known as one of the most secluded structures in the whole of Europe. At first, it was used as the holiday destination by its owners, and then as a permanent residence, but in recent years it's become a museum dedicated to its history, and it's becoming an increasingly popular tourist attraction too. As a result, it's been kept in pristine condition and could quite easily be used as a home again, and would be ideal for another family like the original owners, who valued their distance from the outside world. Number 7. The Seashell House, Mexico City, Mexico. Built in 2006 and designed by Mexican architect Javier Senosian, the Nautilus House, which is often referred to simply as the Seashell House, is one of the coolest and most spectacular homes you'll find in Mexico City. It was created for a young family with 2 children who had become bored with their conventional home and wanted instead to live in one that was more connected with nature. With clear influences from Gaudi and Frank Lloyd Wright, the Nautilus House has smooth surfaces in every direction, stunning spiral staircases, clever paintings, and the use of colored glass to bring life to the interior as the sunlight beams in. Almost feels as if you're living inside a snail. The entrance is cut into a wall of stained glass. But not all of the building's surprises are so easy to see. Rather than being constructed in the normal way, it's instead made with ferro cement, which essentially means the structure has a core of steel-reinforced chicken wire that's been coated with 2-inch thick composite cement. Not only does this mean that it hardly needs any maintenance, but it's such a solid design that the house is classified as being earthquake-resistant. Each room has its own personality and design aesthetic, from a more pared-back bedroom for the parents to the bold and bright children's rooms, which all make for the ideal family home that's certainly unlike anything else. Number 6. Kokki Pillar, Georgia. Religious buildings have for thousands of years provided people with safety and refuge from the things going on in the outside world. But to really devote their lives to their beliefs, some worshippers have gone to extreme lengths to separate themselves from the rest of humanity and get as close to the heavens as possible. There are examples of this from around the world, but the one that stands out the most is the church that sat on top of the Kokki Pillar. The pillar itself is a 130-foot-tall natural limestone monolith that's in the country of Georgia, and investigations have found that it was used as the site for hermitage since at least the 9th century. There are no steps to reach the top, and it was only in the 1950s that researchers first climbed to the summit. They were stunned by what they found. Not only is there a main church building, but there's also a crypt, 3 hermit cells, a wine cellar, and the ruins of a much older church. It's been the home of a monk from the Orthodox Church called Maxim Kaftarazde for at least the past 20 years after helping to restore the structure, and he only climbs down twice a week to get supplies. Number 5. Sun Valley Starship, Idaho, United States. Mainly built between 2006 and 2009, but only fully completed in the past few years, the Sun Valley Starship is one of the most unique and unusual houses you'll ever see. The $6 million property is on a huge plot of land in Bellevue, Idaho, and from the outside almost looks like a welcoming, strange-shaped cottage made from concrete, steel, glass, and reclaimed wood, but with a striking man-made pond and wonderful rustic outdoor space. Things are no less creative inside, where the space is centered around a huge open kitchen with bar seating, and a further circular bar in the upper-level living area that looks down on the floor below through a skylight-style circular opening. There are 5 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms, heated garages, multiple stairways, and even a concert arena space. A metal elevator cage is used to access each of the 5 levels of the house, including the top floor where there's an outdoor Olympic-length swimming pool, and virtually all of the materials used in the construction were locally sourced and reclaimed. Feeling both traditional and very futuristic, the home certainly earns its name of the Sun Valley Starship, and it's no wonder the real estate market was excited in 2019 when it was last put up for sale. Number 4. Flintstone House, Hillsborough, California. Residents of the town of Hillsborough, California are used to seeing houses of various different shapes and sizes. But of all those there, the one that stands out the most has to be the one that overlooks the Doran Memorial Bridge in San Mateo Creek. It's widely known as the Flintstone House. It was designed by architect William Nicholson and built in 1976. The original plan wasn't for it to look like the home owned by the famous Hanna-Barbera characters, and was instead an experiment in new building techniques. The domes and walls were made from steel rebar and wire mesh frames that were wrapped around aeronautical balloons, and then completely covered in sprayed concrete to give it its rigidity. Inside the house, there's around 2,700 square feet of living space, which includes 3 bedrooms, and there's also a spiral staircase that was inspired by an ice cream cone, along with a 2-car garage. All of the interior surfaces are rounded, and the master bedroom has a floor made of stones rather than tiles. But this is only the beginning of why it would soon become known as the most famous house of bedrock. At first, the exterior was painted in an off-white color, but the new owners decided instead to paint it orange with a purple domed roof in the 2000s, and further added murals and statues of the characters from the show, along with sculptures of dinosaurs, a woolly mammoth, and a giraffe. It must be cool to live in, but you have to feel for the neighbors who have to see the property develop in this way over the past 2 decades. There was an attempt to encourage an inspection from the Architectural Review Board in 2019, but the property was found to be completely within the guidelines and can remain exactly how it is. Number 3. Coober Pedy. Coober Pedy in Australia is in the middle of the outback, but has drawn people from far and wide because of something that's hidden within the ground there: opals. The stones have been mined there for more than 100 years, with an estimated 70% of the world's opal production being linked to there, with most of the town's 3,500 residents working in the opal industry. As you'd expect, it's quite an inhospitable environment. During the summer, temperatures can be as high as 113 degrees Fahrenheit or 45 degrees Celsius in the shade. And so the residents have come up with an ingenious way of making life more comfortable. They started building underground. Homes have multiple rooms within the rock. The local hotel is half underground. There's an underground church, and even the majority of bars are dug into the earth too. Here it stays at a reliable 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 Celsius, and more than half of the locals live like this. Above the surface, things are red and dusty. On the dusty golf course, players are given a square of carpet to tee off from, and the city has passed a tree planting initiative to try to provide shelter for those braving the streets. If the surroundings seem familiar to you, then it may be because this is a popular place for filmmakers. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome was shot here, where it would make use of all the former opal mines to create that post-apocalyptic vibe. Number 2. Beer Can House, Houston, Texas. Houses around the world are generally made of similar materials such as bricks, cement, mud, sheets of metal, or sometimes even plastic. But that doesn't mean other components aren't just as effective. With communities now producing more garbage than ever before, it's possible that what would be normally seen as junk could be repurposed to build new homes. And one of the more unusual and outlandish examples of this can be found in Houston, Texas. The man who built it, John Milkovich, was an avid beer drinker and would, according to his family, drink at least 6 cans a day. When he retired in the 1960s, he realized just how much waste this was producing and decided that instead of throwing the cans away, he'd use them to renovate and rebuild his house. The Beer Can House, as it's now known, became an 18-year obsession for Milkovich, during which time he covered his house, fence, and tree with more than 50,000 cans, as well as bottle caps, bottles, and other beer-related items. He began the process by covering the house and his yard with concrete after becoming tired of having to mow the grass, and this became the perfect foundation to add to cans and objects. He made sculptures too, like windmills and wind chimes, and also made fences and gates from them as well. It, of course, stands out amongst all the other homes of the neighborhood and has become a local visitor attraction, and despite being used as a private residence, While most people wouldn't want to live in a place like this, it certainly serves as a reminder of how trash always has the potential for being repurposed without needing to be sent to a landfill. Number 1. Noam Spaceship House, La Moraleja, Spain. There's a lot of talk about how humans could potentially live on other worlds or in outer space, and NASA, along with other space agencies around the world, have spent a great deal of resources in recent decades to learn how humans would react living for extended periods of time in spaceships. They could, however, have just waited, because a number of futuristic homes are being based on UFO designs. Possibly the most impressive is known as the Noam Spaceship House, and it was completed in 2015 in the hills of La Moraleja in Spain. It was created for a film director who's also a massive science fiction fan and wanted to live in a home fit for the future that also gave him the views across the hilltop. To build it as quickly as possible without disturbing the serene environment, most of the house was pre-built in a factory and simply installed in place, with the actual construction on site taking just 2 months. The exterior is made of galvanized steel, and beneath it is insulated timber, which helps keep the home cool in the summer and warm in the winter. 13-foot or 4-meter tall struts are used to suspend the house in the air to enhance the views, and a former airplane stairway is used to gain access. As you'd expect, technology is at the heart of this home, and virtually everything can be controlled by a smartphone app. There's no doubt that the house looks like something you'd expect to see on an alien planet, and it'd hardly be a surprise if, when the time comes, if the owner was able to fly into the sky and resettle somewhere else. While we all may not be living in spaceship-esque buildings anytime soon, the idea of prefab designs is already becoming more common, and the use of new materials is also something we'll see more often in the coming years. I'll see you next time. Watch our binge-watching playlist if you'd like to watch all of our most popular top 15 videos. Grab a drink, grab a snack, and get ready to binge.